Good. Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. Well, without further ado, we'll go straight over to the interview now.
Great to have David Burrowes. Actually, the last time I saw you, I think you were on the Parliament channel, and I was watching the proceedings from Parliament and saw your smiling face. So it's good to see you again, David. Thank you for joining us.
No, it's a great pleasure. No, those were the days.
All right. How many years ago were you in Parliament?
So it's getting on a bit now. So that was 2017. I was an MP for 12 years until losing in the 2017 snap election. But so you can't quite take the MP out of me, but not the politics and the politician in many ways.
And you stood again, didn't you? You tried to.
I did. Yeah, I did. It's I'm so, as a recovering MP, it takes a lot, through that journey to get through that. And one of those, I think, parts of recovery is you go back to it again and now and again. And so I did, and stood again in December 2019, and lost again. I think I finally got the message from my constituency that I probably have to look elsewhere if I want to stand again in Parliament.
And would you like to stand again? Would you like to try and get back into Parliament?
Yes, I would. I would. It's something which I do on the basis that I don't just want it, in terms of like this is a career I want to have. I mean, who'd want to be an MP, say, in many ways, but I do it from the point of view of motivating to serve. And if that's what that's what God I believe is right for me, then that's what I'll do. And if that's, there's lots of ways we can serve, and I think I've realised life continues outside Parliament, but nevertheless, if that's the way I can serve, then so be it.
Indeed. And what are you doing now? What work are you doing?
So a combination of things. I'm a lawyer by trade, so a little bit of law. I've a criminal defence solicitor, so I spent most of my time defending villains. It wasn't politician. It wasn't in Parliament. Well, you may think I had a lot to do if I was an MP, but no. So it was. So I did less of that now, but I dabbled a bit with that in recent times. But so I chair a financial services trade body. So on the one hand, I'm in the city normally, if we weren't in these COVID times. And so I'm a chair of a trade body, and then other times still in Westminster. I can't quite leave Westminster, but I work for and with Fiona Bruce, Member of Parliament, who's the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. So I effectively deputise and work with her on that important issue, which is a global issue of challenging for those who are persecuted for the sake of their freedom or belief. And so that's a real privilege to support her in that role. And then in the meantime, there's a bit more opportunity to be back in the human race outside of Parliament and be involved with family and with dogs who are very attentive. Actually, normally this time they're looking at me, what's going on? Life revolves around us now in COVID. We should be out there going for a walk. What's going on? So they're very perturbed.
And I think you've got a lovely story about when Piers Morgan interviewed you and your dogs.
Yeah, in fact, I'm just holding the hand of my Labrador, faithful hound friend, who takes a real interest in interviews. So yes, so Piers Morgan interviewed me. We did it I said, okay, I'll only be interviewed at the crack of dawn for your breakfast show if you come to me, your cameras and your everything else come to me. So he did that. It was still the crack of dawn, and what I had to do is try and keep one of the deals of any morning interviews was always the case: do not wake the whole household, because once the dogs really fully wake up, all the rest of the children, it's over time with 6 children, you just don't want to, get everyone else up. So I was being interviewed by Piers Morgan. Actually, it was about issues of refugees. I'd been out to the Calais jungle and looking into the plight of refugees, appalling plight actually in many ways. And he was very interested to hear what I wanted to say. And actually, as Piers Morgan goes, it was quite a soft interview. It wasn't the hardest. He was actually trying to use me to get at the government over issues of refugees. Right. But nevertheless, he just still gave me a bit of a challenging time. But the biggest challenge actually was, I had Piers Morgan effectively in one ear, and then I had my dog, who was desperately to come on the sofa and trying to keep him at bay. And so it was, if anyone plays back the interview, it's me going, it wasn't Piers Morgan I was so concerned about, it was my dog Chumley. But there we are.
Now I'm going to go back a little bit, because I'd like to explore more about your time in Parliament. But actually, I think when you lost in 2017, it was when Theresa May lost a lot of ground, and she apologised to the MPs that lost position in her party, didn't she?
She did. I mean, there was about 35 members of Parliament who lost, and so she had a lot of calls to make to say mea culpa, and so she phoned around. She got my answer machine, so I've got this answer machine message, which I haven't kept actually, but which it's not often you get a prime minister on an answer machine saying sorry. I mean, that's probably something that I could actually have sold on eBay for.
Now, tell us about your time in Parliament. 12 years. What's it like being just an MP? And it all seems very glamorous from our point of view, but from your point of view, what's it like?
Well, I mean, firstly, it is a joy and privilege. I mean, growing up in my area here at Enfield Southgate, so to be able to speak up, to go to Parliament and speak up for your local area is fantastic. It's great, and so there's that that joy of it. But there is it's a challenge because you are obviously there's been huge challenging issues over times, and you're there. You're there. You're not going to please everyone all the time, and you're going to get a lot of challenge and criticism, and particularly in this world of social media, you are, and the news cycle is 24 hours. So there's the intensity of always being on public display, and you won't get public displays of affection always, even not private. And so I effectively walked out the door here, and I was on public in my public role, and I had to properly handle myself, and it means though that you always are on the job, and so there's that challenge. So, but it was I mean, it's the hours are long. I mean, people haven't got so much sympathy for MPs, I'm sure, in many ways, but frankly they do a hard job, and it's one that does lead whether to you losing an election or to it's a snakes and ladders situation where there's 1 minute up, 1 minute down, but really, you have to be relentless into your causes and concerns, and actually keep looking. Not because really, it's a great thing to be an MP, but you wouldn't really do it actually just for the sake of the job, really, ultimately, or just for the sake of the pay, or for the sake. I mean, some people may for a while, but you won't last long or be happy. You've got to do it because you genuinely care about serving your area or speaking up for your area, and that's what makes it great. And so, I loved it.
Well, let me put a different point of view. Ian Paisley, when he was MP, I heard him once say the reason the MPs make so many stupid decisions is that they're half drunk most of the time.
Well, did he so? That's right. Well, I mean, certainly the House of Commons does have its fair share of bars and places available for watering holes, but I mean, I suppose there isn't too much of a confession to say that a late night vote, you had to, the whips who were on hand to make sure everyone votes in the right corridor, do sometimes have to give a bit of a guiding hand to one or two colleagues. But I think in these days, particularly actually when actually not least scrutiny involves the opportunity for lots of people to take pictures or to take messages, people are very much on guard and realise that they have to behave themselves, quite rightly so. So that's an interesting. Ian Paisley, he was quite a character actually, and he was extraordinary. I mean, it's great that one of the delights was when I first went to Parliament was to see across the floor people like Ian Paisley and Dennis Skinner and others, as I was walking down trying to find a place to sit in Parliament, because it was all crammed full of people. I'd heard a lot and worked out a lot of things to do, and I'd had an induction program, but no one had told me exactly where you secured your seat. So I was worried that I was going to have to walk over, stand over, and just step on the toes of Ian Paisley to try and squeeze myself into a seat. And I ended up walking down the aisle and shaking the hands of my leader of my party and saying, "Hello, I'm David Burrowes from the Southgate," looking around for a seat, and realising that once I said hello to him, I'd say hello to the whole of the front bench. "Hello, I'm David Burrowes from the Southgate." And only at the end did I realise that MPs don't shake each other's hands. It's because we used traditionally, we had these swords that you end up. What I was doing was stabbing the whole of the front bench, and symbolically by shaking their hands, sort of, hello. And so it's not surprising that I didn't really get a job in the front bench much, but there we are.
Wonderful moments, yes. Were you, I don't know, when you first met, say, the leader of the party, which was he David Cameron to begin with, your first?
It was actually Michael Howard, first of all.
All right.
Yeah, I've been through quite a few leaders, actually.
Was there a tremendous sense of awe, or did you feel more on a par with them?
Well, so there was a leveler. I mean, that's the interesting thing about Commons. It's full of traditions and full of the architecture, but it is a real leveler, because it's one vote. You've all got one vote, and so the leveler is, whilst there's a deference and respect, you all are equally there as members of Parliament. So you all, Prime Minister downwards, you all have a constituency surgery, and you all are in there, as I say, in Parliament with that one vote. And so there is that levelling. If I could just, I realised that when I went first into Parliament, that there was a vote around freedom for, say, street preachers to be able to say what they want without being accused of hate crime. And there was one vote in it, and Tony Blair got the wrong message from the whips that he didn't need to be around. And I was there. You could say that one vote mattered against the Prime Minister, Tony Blair. But also the leveller is this, just briefly, is that my first real proper meeting, having symbolically put my sword to Michael Howard say hello, was when he invited me, because I was one of the few people that won during that election. And so he came and spoke to me. He wanted to do a little sandwich thing to chat to a few of the newbies about how did you do it. And unfortunately, I didn't show sufficient awe or respect, because I was sitting to the right of him and desperate to eventually say something at the very end. We got to coffee, I hadn't said anything. So I, as I do now, I moved my hand enthusiastically and knocked the coffee all over him.
Over Michael Howard?
Completely over Michael Howard. And some people may think, good on you. but it meant that, and he acted with great grace and good manners. And I said, look, can I have this coffee character test for future leadership contests? Because I went through a few leaders. And so I'll surreptitiously throw coffee over them all and see how they react and what their character's like.
Now, clearly, we'll find out how you became a Christian in a few moments, David, but you were there and you were known as a Christian MP, but that would have led you into conflict, and especially, I think, perhaps with David Cameron. Can you tell us about any of this?
Yes, I mean, the wonderful thing is there's MPs from all backgrounds, all faiths and none. And there is perhaps greater freedom in Parliament, in that part of the public square, to say what you believe. And I was elected as a member of Parliament from a particular party, but the primary, but also I was elected and I made clear what I was about. I was there as a Christian, and I had support from those of all faiths and none who recognised and respected the values that were alongside that. But it does mean that whilst there is freedom to like conscience issues, there's a free vote for you to vote whichever way your conscience. Plainly, your conscience doesn't just simply stop on classic issues of, say, abortion or ethical issues. My conscience as a Christian imbues, hopefully, all my votes and all issues. So there were clashes and challenges, and often those would happen behind closed doors, just to try and encourage and change the minds and views of others. But yes, I mean, there were certain key times when my conscience did bring me into conflict. Two areas I can think of, if you want me to mention.
Yes, please,
one was the issue of same-sex marriage and the same-sex marriage bill, which I led the parliamentary opposition, which was a cross-party opposition to, and the other one was the further liberalisation of Sunday trading. And again, I led the opposition to that. Again, across party. I called it an unholy alliance at the time because it involved the Scots. No, but it's in fact, we won that one and defeated the government on a 3-line whip.
Right.
The other one, the same-sex marriage bill, was a free vote, but it was one that personally actually brought me into conflict with the views of my Prime Minister of the day. Yeah.
Were you able to talk to him face to face about it?
Yes, we did. We had a memorable conversation face to face in number 10 in his study, and he's sitting in his sofa as I sat with him. He'd sort of reoriented the Downing Street study in his sort of character, sofa, and a bit like Tony Blair was very much a sofa person as well. And so very open to discussing, but it got a bit awkward when I realised that my views around marriage were different from his, and what he saw was simply just opening up the opportunities to cement a loving relationship. I saw very much more about redefining marriage. So we did have some interesting words. Yeah, absolutely.
I think you came out with a classic statement, Prime Minister, let's talk about sex.
That's right. Roger, you remind me. Don't remind me. That's right. Yes, let's talk about sex, Prime Minister. Yes. So I'm probably one of the few people to say that, hopefully. I won't talk about any other Prime Ministers in that context, but I think that was an interesting question, which if ever was to write a book, maybe that'd be the headline. Yeah.
Your autobiography. Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Now let's go back. Were you brought up in a Christian home, David?
So it was, yeah, and great privilege and joy to be so, and it was parents. From the word go, really, I always knew about God's love and was effectively taken along to a great church that was a really good place to be to learn about Christianity. But it was very much for my sort of early teenage years, up to teenage years, it was pretty much as a passenger taken in the car, effectively taken along, and that was probably my version of the faith, really, just that it was my parents' faith that I was going along to, and I was really quite enjoying it. Actually, there was quite a nice youth club and things like that. So that's how things started off. Yeah,
and you came to a position of trusting Christ as your own Lord and Savior fairly young.
Yeah, I did. So it would have been around 13 when I realised that it was actually more. I couldn't just rely upon what my parents thought, and I couldn't just rely upon it just being it wasn't just about Bible stories at a Sunday school, that it was actually about a relationship, and it was about my life, and I needed to make a decision because I was told. I remember going on a sort of a youth camp where I was told about what Jesus did on the cross, and the person preaching said names. He went to the cross and died for you, David, for you, and I realised that he actually did all that for me, and he saved me. He took my sins on the cross, and that made me realise, I just couldn't just simply just look on it from afar. And I had to make a decision, and my decision, I realised that I had to accept that Him as my Lord and Saviour. And look, this has been a continued journey, recognising that He's my Saviour and my Lord, and realising that Lordship is over all of my life. And whether as a politician, as a lawyer, as a parent, that's an ongoing journey. But that fundamental decision was made, and the work was done by Jesus on the cross. That's the wonderful thing, that is, He's done it all for me, and that free gift that I can accept. And I realized I suppose I'd been told before, but I freshly realized at that age, there's been challenges on the way, but that's it. Yeah.
Well, as you said, it's been an ongoing journey, and all right, I'm sure that was very real for you at the age of 13. But I know that later on, as a teenager, something dramatically sort of drove home the significance of the decision that had been made.
Yeah, so the reality of it came home. It does. It comes over in different parts of life's ups and downs. And the big challenge for me was when my father died when I was 17, and he was my rock. I looked up to him, loved him, still do. And when I think of him, and but when he'd gone, it meant I had to reevaluate. What's this all about? This, it made, obviously, life and death hit me hard, and I had to realise that this wasn't just a sort of this wasn't a lifestyle choice issue. This was a life and death issue, and I had to wake up to that quickly, because I had to deal with the fact that my father just died, and what did that mean? And I was able just to look at the Bible and realise that. The Bible talks all about life and death, and it wasn't just thinking, I needed it just to sort of feel comforted. I mean, there was that comfort from knowing that my ultimate hope in life is my Lord Jesus Christ, but it was also, it made me realise this is serious, and I need to get real, and I need to recognise that extraordinarily He is Lord. he's my Lord, a Lord over a life and death. And so it was a very real, yeah.
David, your father was a believer, a Christian.
He was.
And had he been sick, or did he die suddenly? Or?
So he had asthma, and he'd had previous asthma attacks, and got pretty close to death, but he'd survived, and we kind of got used to that he would survive. And he had another asthma attack when we were in France on holiday. And we actually ended up having to, myself and my sister, come home. My mum stayed there, and we just fully expected him to come home, but he didn't.
Wow. So, David, for you, presumably you went to university, and you're going there as a Christian who now really is a very committed Christian. What's it like to be a Christian at university when there's so much secularism, so many temptations, so easy to sort of drift away from your Christian foundations?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'd never come across so much alcohol as I came acrost at university.
Even in Parliament. Sorry.
You can't come off that. Actually, there was a similarity because it was subsidised alcohol, right. As it was in Parliament. But so there is there is an interesting element of similar culture, but the extent of alcohol and freedom really to just do what you want was a challenge. I suppose I'd been helped by actually the year. It was year after my father died, and it given me a bit of more of a solid grounding in just reading through the Bible and realizing that I needed to just give myself a solid ground to that. And so I was able to, I think, realize that that there is more to life. From the perspective of my father dying, actually gave me a sort of probably earlier than a lot of people, perspective on life. And I realized, what is life all about? And it was more, I'm not perfect, and it wasn't, if someone had a video cam on my student life experience, I'm sure they could pick me up on a lot of stuff, and I'm sort of suggestive holding the line on my student experience. But never so, even when things got tripped up or things weren't up to the mark that of Jesus' perfect standards, one knows that it's his perfection that allows me to be right with God. And so I suppose I had a solid understanding because of and a perspective because of my father's death into understanding, yes, what life is all about, and actually that it's because of what Jesus did on the cross that means that I'm right with him. So in the sense that whilst there's challenges as a student, you could always fall back on and rely upon what Jesus did for me and his grace. So that helped me, and hopefully helped me in the sense to realize that I'm not going to, when I'm there to pick up my mates and bring them home having got drunk down at the local pub. I'm there for them. I'm not going to I'm with them. And I care for them as Jesus did. He went into the world to be in places and challenges and problems and issues, and I want to be engaged in there. I don't want to be just out there in a sort of holy spire on by myself. I want to be engaged, and so I kind of worked as a student, trying to very much be in and around, which is challenging, and you do need to check yourself at times. But I wanted to hold out to these people that I'm not just simply telling you again about a lifestyle choice I'm into. Look, I do think it's a lot healthier probably not to get drunk and not to do. Yes. It doesn't surprise me that the God who created us has actually given us things that actually help we live life to the full. But actually what it's about is trying to point you the reasons for it. I want to help you understand that it's by grace that I'm saved, and I want you that as well. Now, I'd say though, I confess, I think that there are those, student friends and others, who I did a lot of kind of, this is what I'm about. But it's very easy for people to think that you're just someone who's a bit trying to do good and get right with God. And I probably did need to do more of telling people that actually the reason that I want to do good is because of the Lord, who is the most good, the full of goodness, who gives that free gift and that graciousness that we want to show. And so I suppose I learned more from the student days, about the issue of engagement in life and in politics. I got involved in politics as a student as well.
Did you? Yes. Now, David, all right, you're a Christian, you have a relationship with God through the Lord Jesus Christ, and then you have the immense disappointment of losing your seat.
Yeah.
But it's seen on television as well, so
Oh yes.
they're
Oh yeah.
recording every camera's on you, a sort of, you have
Yeah.
a Michael Portillo moment. And how do you cope with that?
Well, my Michael Portillo moment was, and in fact, we say the Michael Portillo moment, don't we? Because that was the top 10 BBC moment ever when Michael Portillo lost. He was for those who are younger than us, who don't forget those votes, or you, but that was a big moment when it showed the big catastrophic defeat of the Conservative Party in those days. When I won. It wasn't such a big moment for the BBC, but when I lost, it wasn't too big a moment. But it was a big moment for us and around. And what happened in that moment was there was a Cypriot candidate got elected, and his Cypriot friends decided to sort of do a Greek Zorba dance. They did it just about the time they're announcing the numbers of losing, and so it was a real sort of, it was a real, because they were so delighted that I'd lost and he'd won, and it was really kind of it was quite hard to compose and keep yourself, and because a whole lot of team that really invested a lot of time and effort to you, and you're leading a team who are so devastated, but it's brutal. The American system or the European systems often have it much easier because they do everything almost remotely, and you don't have the sort of, you're in the same sort of sport hall where you're just looking at the stacking up of 1,000 votes and 1,000, and you just see the fact that you're just
oh dear.
It's all, and so big hopes and careers can be won or lost there, and it's there we are.
But were you, I don't know, how did it impact you?
So I was immediately after, I was in tears, devastated.
Were you?
I'm really upset because I was upset 12 years member of Parliament, but it was actually, I felt there's so much more I can do. There's so much more, that I feel it's sort of unfinished business. It was a snap election. It was kind of it's been taken away kind of thing, and there's no sort of easy route through saying, some people think actually there's these shadowlands where you're an MP still when you lose, and you're sort of a politician somewhere in the ether. But that's it. You're given, like in other jobs, you're given your forms, and you've given a month or two of salary, and then you're off in your head. That's over to you to whatever, find out what you can do next. And so it was quite a shock. And shock for the family, they weren't quite sure what's going to happen next.
And did you find, I don't know, your colleagues, fellow MPs, did they try and comfort you, console you? Did people get in touch and say, "Oh, David, I'm really sorry"?
So we got the answer machine message from the Prime Minister.
Yes.
So we got that. And other MPs are very good. And cross-party actually, and people forget there is a really good cross-party relationship.
Yes.
Actually. And so there was good, lovely messages.
Did you feel annoyed about Theresa May? Did you think, why did you have that election?
Of course. Yes. Of course. Yeah, absolutely. And that's right. It was, you have to deal with those issues and get over it. But it is politics, and that's. I always went into politics trying to hold it lightly. And I think whatever we're involved in, we have to just recognise, this isn't about us. We just, hold it like, angels, the Chesterton quote, angels can fly because they learn to hold themselves lightly. And it's that kind of, I've always recognised that I've held it in trust and it could be taken away. I mean, look, like Portillo, like my predecessor, Stephen Twigg. In fact, Stephen Twigg, he was the first to text me to say, "David, I know how you feel." And, if you ever want to contact me. So it's really nice. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Now, obviously, you're an MP for the sort of locality you live in. So when you go out on the street now or in a park or whatever, do people still recognise you? Do they come and talk to you?
I try my best, and I've got a little hair there and a woolly hat on and with the dogs. But so even just yesterday, I thought, I just had there is a freedom sense that people now realize you're back now in the human race, welcome again. So people talk to you about the weather, about COVID, about vaccines, about what they think about cycle lanes and whatever. But then it doesn't take long, and in fact happened yesterday where after having a little chat about the dogs. And by the way, I'd just like to talk to you about the Iraq War, about, what's going on with the plight of the left or the right or Brexit or whatever. So so people still realise that there's a right to engage.
How interesting. And David, when you were in Parliament, were you, because you were known as a Christian, did you, as it were, become an informal chaplain to other MPs who would come and talk to you about their personal issues? I'm not asking now for specific stories, but were you viewed in that light?
So, I mean, what was welcome was that there's an issue of trust. There's an issue of trust in politics. There's new trust there has been in Parliament, which is which developed over the Brexit debates, when there was a real breakdown in people trusting each other. But one of the things I really sought to do was to unconditionally care for others. I mean, trying to show something of Jesus Christ's example of that, in terms of unconditionally being out there for others, whatever's going on. And so, because people got into problems and challenges and real serious issues, I just wanted to be out there, be in there, in the mess and the brokenness, to be there and to show compassion. And so I did do a lot of that and sought to help. And I've been able to continue some of that. Now I've got a role to help pastor in a way, support and just be there, having been through it, just to sort of help them. Because like the rest of life and society, that as the human race, they still go through issues, mental health challenges, accused of things they've done and not done, and they need someone who they can trust.
How interesting. And you were involved in a Bible study, a parliamentary Bible study. I'd love to know more about this. I think it's your brother-in-law actually who speaks at it, but tell us more about it.
Yeah, so he leads it, and so one of the there's more Christian activity, I think, than ever before amongst parliamentarians across Parliament, and there's these Bible studies going on, both cross-party and individual parties, and I was involved in one of those, and I would say there's more Christian MPs reading the Bible than ever before. Now, there's been lots of prayer activity over the years, but actually reading the Bible together, and that's been a real joy. And one of the MPs aren't very good at necessarily sharing their lives and certainly opening themselves up to each other. They're used to in the tea room having a chat about the latest bill or lobbying about this, or what's your view of the Prime Minister now or there, and all those things go on, and they still go on. It's a full gossip place. But so actually opening yourself up in a Bible study with each other is a very humbling, and to humble yourself and to read the Bible and to learn. And it does expose yourself, your whole life. It's a spirit working through. And really, it's a living word, and that's something which is a big dynamic that does also develop. After that, trust and respect. And so, the Christian MPs across the floor will show perhaps an added respect for each other, and they even meet together. They won't just be gossiping; they'll be talking to encourage each other and support each other in their faith. So that's a really great aspect which goes on behind the scenes.
That's amazing. So you'd have them from different parties gathering together, once a week to study the Bible?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's absolutely wonderful. And do you ever sort of wink at somebody across the on the other side? We're in this together.
I don't think there's anything sort of, and we certainly don't do any Masonic kind of, just so you're going to do this for me. But certainly, I think in the way people act, their respect, the way they talk with each other, those who you would begin to notice the fact of, there's an attitude of realizing that, and you may be in different parties, we may have different ways that we want to go about this, but we pretty much agree with the ends, and certainly we agree with how we treat each other, because there is a concern, isn't there, that people just slag each other off and criticize each other, but playing the ball rather than the person is very much a Christian attitude.
Historically, who are your great heroes as far as Parliament is concerned? I'm hoping you're going to reply a Yorkshireman, but we'll see. But who are your great sort of historical parliamentary heroes? Yeah,
it would have to be, the foremost is William Wilberforce.
There's the Yorkshireman, yes.
And the reason being, and it's a classic one, but it's one that I've really, I mean, look, I've got quite a lot. I would put myself in any way in the similarities with Wilberforce, apart from having 6 children like him. And we also suffered from a similar health complaint, actually, quite interesting.
What's that, ulcerative colitis?
I wasn't going to say that. I was going to keep that private one.
I'll tell you how I know it. It's because, well, I've read his biography, of course, but it's the way he's seated, the way he's crossed his legs. It's a symptom of those who've got ulcerative colitis. So
before I mean, this is wonderfully telling the world about this. Before I had this dealt with by good medication, if some people noticed in my early parliamentary career, when I was finishing a speech quite quickly, it was because I needed to sort things out. But it did mean that I had some great conversations with people. The best conversation I had with Gordon Brown was in the toilet just behind the Commons. Anyway, enough of that toilet talk. But back to William Wilberforce. So the thing, yes, he was a great example as a parliamentarian who really was full of prayer. He was full of the politics action. We can, wonderfully, his, leading the abolition of this transatlantic slave trade and lots of other stuff he did as well. But he was so prayerful. He said, pray, pray, pray. And that was a great example to me, because we can be full of one's activity or ambition. And also when he was so desperately concerned about what to do next, and I've got so much on my plate. I've got the reform bill here, I've got slave trade here, I've got this going on, and I've got to be a father to 6. I've got this house, and in a lesser way, I kind of felt that. I think, oh no, what am I going to do? And what did he do? He said, I flee. Now, it wasn't, in some ways you could think, I just run. I want to escape. He fled to his Lord and Saviour. He fled to the cross. He went to the cross. When we see the battles, and there was battles I had in Parliament and politics and life we do, where did he flee to? It was to the cross, to his Lord and Saviour, who he could know that's because of the grace of Lord Jesus Christ. That's what gave him the strength. That's what gave him the way to battle. And so that was, in my sense, it's the way he was as a Christian, as much as his achievement, that I see as a real model and hero.
David, time's gone really, but and I don't want you to name names, but in being in Parliament, have you seen any MPs actually become Christians while they are in Parliament? And have you seen people come in as Christian MPs who sort of just lose it because of, I don't know, the love of power, the love of politics or whatever? So both, two different questions, but to do with the same issue.
Yes. So there's a member of Parliament who spectacularly mucked up, scandalously so, and all over the papers, who went to the rock bottom, who almost needed that, strangely, needs to humble himself. He was full of pride, full of puffed up in many ways, but and found Jesus Christ and became a Christian. And he won. The big win was actually knowing the Lord Jesus Christ as his Saviour. Everything else was lost comparing the gain, and he eventually got deselected, and he's gone. He's still going to deal with the brokenness of his scandalous situation, and that still has consequences in relationships, but nevertheless, he was humbled and brought to the ground, and he became a Christian. That's one example. Another example of someone who just, in fact, was involved in our Bible studies, and just was, the coal was with the other coals, the hot coals, growing together and learning, but then just left that because they got higher office, and because they were just busy in high office, and just got ensnared, it looks like, and just got colder really to hearing the Bible, living words speak to that person, and just went cold, and lost track. And it became obvious in some of the views and values that were then espoused that it was someone who just seemed to lose the way.
David, are you concerned about wokeness, the curtailing of freedom of speech?
Internationally, I am. So this is it. I think we need to have a perspective on this and look at these freedoms. They are freedoms for us all in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of religion or belief, and we need to uphold these universal rights. And I think we can sometimes see it as our own issue. And what we need to be fighting for, as much as in our own country, is to ensure there's a true tolerance and respect that's based on the fundamental rights that we have, Christian-inspired universal rights that we need to uphold. That's what we should also be doing, but particularly it's for the sake of others. And I think sometimes people can section themselves off saying it's about my rights, but this is a universal right. In fact, the greatest advocates are those who don't agree with you. What I loved in Parliament was those who really they couldn't stand what I thought, but they really respected my right to believe it and say it. Happened over the same-sex marriage bill, to try and ensure, yes, there's a right to you having conscience that view. I won't call you bigoted or homophobic. Sadly, many people did, to the point of I got attacked on social media. I got death threats over it. It revealed what we're seeing more in other ways of an identity, which you've got to have this identity, which is an orthodoxy, that unless you're there, you're going to be cast out. We need to get beyond that and recognise Christian-inspired human rights values are what makes the world properly go round. But we need to do it for the sake of others. And what I say internationally is I'm working with Fiona Bruce on her role as Prime Minister's Special Envoy. And when we see the scale of persecution, a third of the world is persecuted because of their faith or belief. And of that third, 80% are Christians. That's who we should be really spending most of our energy and attention fighting for their universal rights. And we know where it leads to hate, it leads to violence, it leads to terrorism, it leads to awful things and atrocities, it leads to genocide, sadly, now. And we must, on their behalf, that's what really is the challenge, I think, for us all, the global challenge.
Finally, Michael Portillo got his television programme with going on trains all over the continent and the country. Have you got anything in store like that?
Yes. No, I haven't. It's not for the moment. I think maybe, and I suppose we all feel this at the moment through the COVID times, is, the walk with the dog is of preeminent importance. And I've just found so many new ways to find more interesting ways to walk with the dogs. They do end up, as you said before, often with someone grabbing hold of me for a political conversation. So I could certainly have a go at some walking with dogs, but no, I'm happy to leave that to Michael as well, and still probably feel I've got a role in perhaps in parliamentary politics. But
indeed. No, I think they're great programs. I think he's done a good job. But David, thank you very, very much. I hope one day we'll be able to say David Burrowes MP. Thank you very much. But until then, we're really grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the best. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to David and Roger. What a fascinating interview, and all sorts of interesting things that we've never imagined we've heard about from our MPs or past MPs. So thank you, David. And it's good to have you here with us, and looking forward to hearing from you a little bit later in the question time. But now I'm going to hand over to Michael, and he's going to speak to us for a few minutes. So good to have you here with us, Michael. Let me hand over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, David. And thank you to David as well, David Burrowes. What a great story that was. And I'm sure you'll want to be asking your questions of David in a few minutes' time. But I was struck by what David said at the end, that there's more MPs in Parliament now studying the Bible than ever. Sometimes we might think of the parliaments of our country as a place that's very secular, but it's interesting that right across the political parties, there are those studying the Bible, those who are Christians, maybe those who are investigating the Christian faith. But that's really intriguing, isn't it? Also interesting, they're from all political parties. Christianity isn't represented by one political party as if one party summed up the whole of the Christian faith. Christianity is so much bigger than that. And there's many things across the parties that we would resonate with, maybe many things also that we would want to challenge, as we've heard from David tonight. But it's fascinating that right across there's this interest in the person of Jesus. And so as Rebecca read to us earlier from this passage in the teaching of Jesus from Matthew's Gospel, I want us to think about it for a few minutes tonight before we go to questions. But before we look at that passage, I want to show you a short video. This is something I came across on Twitter, one of the better things I came across on Twitter over the last few weeks. It's a short video of something that happened in Nepal, in the Himalayas, just recently. It's called a cloud avalanche. It's when very unique phenomenon happens in the mountains, and clouds literally come down the mountains as fast as an avalanche. And you'll see in this dramatic 2-minute clip what happens, and you'll see afterwards what this has got to do with what I'm about to say. But let's just watch this, because I'm sure you'll find it interesting.
Manikiya ako kayo. I guess we are the first one to have captured this kind of glacier, right? Oh my God!
Well, wasn't that, well, awesome in the true word of awesome? Incredible to think of that blue sky day up in the mountains, and then all of a sudden, within 2 minutes, a complete dramatic change in the weather. Quite amazing, even for Britain with our changeable weather, to watch that. But why do we look at that? Well, because actually that in many ways can be a metaphor of life, can't it? There can be periods in life where it seems like the sun is shining and the sky is blue, when everything seems to be in place, when everything's going well, when our dreams are being realized, when our plans are being fulfilled, when everything is okay. And then there are times in life when suddenly everything falls apart. It's as if the storm hits and the blue skies are a thing of the past. And suddenly life, as it were, seems to fall apart. And there are all sorts of storms, aren't there, that might hit us in life. We've heard about some of them in David's story tonight. It may be the storm of bereavement. David spoke very movingly about losing his father. And maybe some of you have experienced the reality, the sudden reality of losing someone that you love, and how that can pull the foundation of your life out. It's so hard when that storm hits. Or maybe it's the storm of redundancy and rejection. Again, fascinating hearing from David about how one day he's an MP and the next day he's not. It's not a kind of gradual process of losing your job. It's just overnight. Now, most of us haven't been MPs, but maybe again, you've experienced what it is to suddenly have your career, your livelihood taken away, a storm that hits unexpectedly out of the blue, we might say. Where do we turn when our foundations are taken away? And of course, whether you've experienced those things, we've all experienced COVID, haven't we? Out of the blue, suddenly our whole world has been turned upside down. And for all of us, we've experienced that in different ways. Whether it's been the experience of isolation, maybe it's been an experience of implications upon our health. It may be an experience that has changed our future, our plans. But what do we do when storms hit us in life and the foundation of our lives are rocked? That's the question we want to think about, that we've already thought about in a way tonight. And it's the question that Jesus poses in this story that we had read to us earlier, a story about two builders, a wise builder and a foolish builder. It's a well-known story. A wise builder who builds his house on the rock, and a foolish builder who builds his house on the sand. The storms hit, and the house on the rock stands, and the house on the sand falls flat. And Jesus illustrating this story because he's saying, actually, all of us are like one of those two men. We're either building our house on the rock or on the sand. But notice, actually, there's two things that are similar about both of those characters in that story. Did you notice that both of the characters in the story experienced storms? It wasn't that the foolish man experienced storms and the wise man didn't. No, the wise and the foolish both experienced a storm. You see, it doesn't matter who you are in life. It doesn't matter whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, whether you're a Christian or an atheist. It doesn't matter how rich you are or poor you are, how wise you are or not wise you are. Whoever you are, at some point in life, in some way, you will experience storms, unexpected events that throw your life upside down. And even if we're able to go through life inoculated, as many of us at least were until recently in the West, from many of the troubles that other people in the world face, of course, we won't ultimately be able to avoid the final storm, the storm of death. The statistics haven't changed. 1 out of 1 people die. and it will happen to us. So both will face storms. And by the way, interestingly, that's also an important point to make, because some people like to give the impression that, hey, if you become a Christian, if you follow Jesus, then everything will be okay in your life. You'll be happy and get everything you want. And Jesus isn't saying that, is he? The wise man faces storms just as the foolish man does. Being a Christian doesn't inoculate you from life's troubles. But as we'll see later, it does give us a foundation that can remain secure. So both of them face storms. That's the reality of life, the world that we live in. We're going to face storms, but how are we going to face them? Now, the other interesting thing about these two people that Jesus talks about, the wise man and the foolish man, is that he says they're both illustrative of people who have heard the teaching of Jesus. So he's not saying that wise people are those who have heard about Jesus and foolish people are those who haven't. No, actually, both of these people had heard the teaching of Jesus. In particular, the context of Jesus' teaching here is the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel. And what I find fascinating is that actually Jesus' teaching has been heard by so many, even if they don't know that it's Jesus' teaching. The Sermon on the Mount contains teaching which has become even part of our normal language in the English culture in which we live. Jesus talks about taking or going the extra mile. He talks about turning the other cheek. Things that we talk about all the time. In fact, I was having a conversation just this afternoon with a friend who's not a Christian. And he said, what are you talking on tonight? I said, I'm talking on this story from the Bible about the wise and the foolish builders. And I told him the story. He said, oh, I never knew that story came from the Bible. Even these teachings of Jesus that have percolated through our culture. We've heard of it. It's affected our culture. But the question is not whether we've heard of it or not. But the question is, what have we done with it? The difference between these two people, Jesus says, it's not that one faces storms and the other doesn't. They both do. It's not that one has heard about Jesus and the other one hasn't. They both have. But he says the difference is that one heard about Jesus and ignored it, and the other heard Jesus' teaching and put it into practice. That's the difference. Now, what does it mean then to put the teaching of Jesus into practice? If that's what a foundation, a secure foundation in life that can withstand storms is all about, what does it mean? Well, what is the teaching of Jesus? You could go back, couldn't you? And you could read Matthew 5, 6, and 7, these chapters in the Bible of Jesus' teaching. And what you'll find is that to put Jesus' teaching into practice is difficult. Because actually what Jesus does is he takes all of the laws from the Old Testament and he doesn't make them easier. He makes them more difficult. He says in the Old Testament, it says, don't murder, but I'm telling you, don't even get angry. In the Old Testament, it said, don't commit adultery, but I'm saying, don't even lust. He says, some people think that you just need to keep your oaths, but I'm telling you, be honest in everything you say. I'm struck by what G.K. Chesterton said about Jesus' teaching. He said, Jesus' teaching hasn't been tried and found wanting. It's been tried and found, it's been found difficult and therefore not tried. In other words, when you start reading the moral teaching of Jesus, you don't get the impression, this is easy. I'll just do this tomorrow at 10 o'clock. But actually you come to the realization that actually I could never do this perfectly. I could never live up to this ultimate perfect standard because we've all failed. None of us are good enough. None of us have loved our neighbor as ourselves. None of us have loved God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. All of us have failed in different ways. So what does it mean to hear the words of Jesus and to put them into practice? Well, that's because Jesus didn't just come to teach us how to live, but he also came to show us how we can be forgiven for when we fail to live the way we should. Jesus shows us the perfect standard of what it looks like to live as a human being. He embodies that himself by perfectly loving others and perfectly loving God. And he also shows us that we fail to do that. But then he shows us that we can be reconnected to this God who we failed and forgiven by him through his death and through his resurrection. And David spoke about that tonight, didn't he? He spoke about how being a Christian is not being perfect. It's not about trying harder, but it's about trusting in what Jesus has done. Jesus came so that we could be forgiven for all the times we failed, forgiven for the ways that we've messed up, and brought back into a relationship with a God who loves us. because on the cross, Jesus was taking all of our sin and all of our wrong in our place, stepping into our shoes, carrying the consequences of our sin so that we can be forgiven and made right with God. And that can give you a foundation in life that's secure. You see, my foundation in life is not based on my job or my career or my relationships or on my moral goodness, because all of those things are unstable, aren't they? But it's based on the fact there is a God who loves me, who's forgiven me, who's with me today by his Spirit, and has promised that the ultimate storm of death is not something I need to fear, because he's already gone before. He is the one who's conquered the grave. He's come back from the cold. He came back from the dead so that we can know there is hope beyond death, beyond the grave. And that is the thing that can give us a truly secure foundation in life. None of us can escape life's storms. They're going to hit us in different ways at different times. But if we have a secure foundation that comes from being forgiven by God, being in relationship with him, and knowing that ultimately even death will not separate us from him, that is a foundation that can give us security. Doesn't mean we're not upset when things happen. I was struck by David speaking very honestly about his grief at his dad's death, at his loss of his job as an MP. But weren't you also struck by the sense of stability, the foundation that he has because he knows Jesus? That's what we can have. A strong foundation to withstand the storms of life. My question is, do you have that foundation in your life? Maybe as your life has been turned upside down in the last year by these events, have you got a foundation which will remain firm? If you don't, why not put your trust in Jesus? Why not discover him as your friend, as your savior, as your constant companion through life, and as the one who will also take you through death one day? You could do that tonight. You could speak to him, ask him to come into your life, to forgive you, and to walk with you through life. He wants to do that. He wants to give you that secure foundation that no matter what storms hit, you can know that life is strong and secure because you know him, the one who is the ultimate rock on which we can build our lives. So if you've not done that, why not speak to this God tonight? Ask him to come into your life and trust him. And if you do that, do get in touch with us. We'd love to help you as you get started building your life on the foundation of Jesus Christ. And David will tell us in a moment about how you can get in touch, and we'll send you a booklet that explains about how you can start out as a Christian. Or if you're not sure that you want to do that yet, you want to investigate this, maybe you're not sure these things are true, you want to look into these claims, we'd also love to send you part of the Bible, one of the accounts of Jesus' life, so you can read that through for yourself and make up your mind based on the first-hand evidence. So why not do that as well? Well, I'm going to hand back to David Donegani, and then we'll go to questions in a moment with David Burrowes as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Michael. And as Michael said, maybe you want to do that. You want to turn from your sin and trust in Christ, or you want to know more. If you want to get in touch, go to reallives.net and you'll find a contact link on there. And that'll take you to another page. You can put a message on there. You can ask for a Bible, a New Testament, or a book on how to become a Christian. So please do get in touch if we can be of help. But it's really good to have David here with us live tonight. And I'm going to hand over to Janice now to let her bring the questions to David. Thank you very much, Janice.
Hi, thank you, David. What has been the best or the most memorable day in your parliamentary career? There could be two different ones, or it could both be the same one.
Yeah. So I spoke about it just during the early interview with Roger, that the most memorable was when I was reminded of what I was there for, which is voting and standing up for fundamental freedoms. So the opportunity to vote, and by one vote win this important amendment, which still stood the test of time in terms of providing an insurance and a guarantee of freedom for those who are, for example, preaching the gospel, not to be criminalized for hate crime. That's still an ongoing issue in other forms, but that was memorable. I suppose the looking further on, though, more memorable was actually an individual case. A constituent called Gary McKinnon, who is facing extradition to the United States, allegedly for hacking into US systems and wasn't a wise thing to do that in any event, but certainly not to also post things about George Bush at the time and to stop the US naval fleet functioning for a few minutes. But he had issues around Asperger's and growing mental illness, and was effectively suicidal, and his life was at risk. And this was a real battle with the government, with the Home Secretaries previously, and then his men, to get to the point to be able to champion his issue and to take it to Parliament, to take it to the Prime Minister, to the Home Secretary. And eventually they decided that they wouldn't extradite him because of his health interests. And that then led to national change. So that's an example of championing an individual and leading to some national changes was particularly memorable.
Is it possible to have a normal, proper family life as well as being an MP?
So you have to ask my family that. In fact, some of them were just listening back on the earlier interview, me talking about the possibility of going back into Parliament, and some saying, no, do not go there, do not go back, because they've seen that there is a challenge. It's not totally normal. Not least, it's not more because, when they would go out to me around the local area, whether it's a park or the shops, there would always be the fact that I would be, as I said, on the job, that I'd be, and I would often be stopped and asked about questions and challenges, and they'd have to be listening. And so for them to be released from that, because it's not normal to have your father just stopped every minute when someone walks by, or and for them to effectively feel that they also had to themselves, actually, and that's something I've felt more of a burden on, is that they've had to carry my position into their life. So their school life has been impacted. Some of the older ones, during the same-sex marriage bill, they got a whole stack of abuse on the bus for what I believed and what I was doing, and that's not normal. And so there's it's not normal. There's there are the positives for the family as well, and things that they can get involved in, but I think it's hard to be normal. Totally. You try to be normal, obviously, when you close the door, and that's the great level, is having children and dogs that can keep you, pull you down to the right level. And so that hopefully we were able to have a normal life, but as soon as you become outside of the door, you're public property.
In a similar vein, is it possible to be a normal, in inverted commas, member of a church as a Christian? How does it impact on your church life and you getting involved in the local church?
As a politician and member of Parliament, is it possible? That's a really good question, and I think it's certainly a challenge for members of Parliament in terms of them having a kind of normal fellowship, church family existence. And that's why actually fellowships, not least in Parliament, and I was involved in the Conservative Christian Fellowship, and there's other Christian fellowships in other political parties, to actually help provide that extra degree of support and fellowship, given those unique challenges. And some MPs have actually said that they found they got their most sort of fellowship and, in fact, growth from those Bible studies, because they struggled back at their Sunday life. Because some MPs decide that they have to go around different churches on Sundays. I always decided that Sundays was a day that we'd ring fence away from being public property, and we would have as much a good family life. In fact, Sundays probably was when we could have the most more normal of family lives. And then also I ring fenced going to my own church, and the church family at Enfield very much respected the family, and we were treated pretty normally. I suppose it became much more normal when I went on a youth camp, and I realised when the first Y game happened that I was the target to be pummeled by the young people. I realised that I was particularly still couldn't quite get off the MP, but they realised that I also bruised like other human beings, and also was willing to have a laugh and be involved. So yes, certainly our church and other churches are better at treating their MP normally. They, in fact, to the point that they wouldn't talk to me about politics at all in that vein on a Sunday, that they would try and they almost worked very hard at trying to preserve our sort of normal existence in that way.
Thank you. And other than Fiona Bruce, are there any other ex-MPs or even current MPs that you're regularly in touch with?
So I'm so I work with Fiona Bruce, so I see most of her. But I'm the Parliamentary Director of the Conservative Christian Fellowship, and that brings me particularly into contact with Christian MPs on the Conservative side. So I'm looking out for them and just trying to effectively help with some sort of pastoral side of things with them, and also link them in with their Christian communities and also other Conservative MPs. So I'm in touch with a lot of MPs actually in that way, and that's a real privilege really, just to sort of having been there before, just to help them, and some new MPs as well. There's some really good new Christian MPs, people like Miriam Cates, there's Danny Kruger, Nick Fletcher, and Stuart Anderson, just to name a few of amongst others who really good, and it's just helpful sometimes the new ones to be able to talk to me about some issues and challenges facing them. So yeah, so I'm in good contact with them. Obviously, contact for everyone during this time has been somewhat limited, and particularly Parliament really exists very much on that face-to-face, in-person contact, to be able to have that coffee. A lot of good political work goes on away from the sort of informal chamber, and so those sort of interactions, and actually like anything involved in this world, it's all based on relationships, and really good relationships really matter. And so building and fostering those relationships matters in Parliament. So I've had the privilege to be able to do that, and hopefully when we can get back in person more, I'll be able to continue that as well.
So as an ex-MP, are you able to lobby political leaders?
Well, I've got Boris's number here, but I'm not saying lobbying him like we've seen in the news. Yes, so that is what others. I mean, look at one of my other roles is as a chair of a financial services trade body, and there formally and in a very appropriate way, I do speak to ministers around issues of financial services, for example, but you treat that carefully and respectfully. So yeah, I mean, you have to treat carefully the fact that, and it's in the news, isn't it? We do have in the world that WhatsApp, you do have a big contact list of those who are in power, and you have to treat that responsibly, so that it's done in appropriate ways. But lobbying is not a bad thing. Lobbying comes obviously from the word urge. You've got central lobby in Parliament is the central place of urging and lobbying. Constituents are encouraged to do that. Those with other interests, charities, business interests, it's all, as long as it's done transparently and openly, it's a good thing. And what's wonderful, just to say about central lobby, which reminds me, I always was delighted when I was lobbied by people to just sort of, when I needed a bit of encouragement, just to look down in the central lobby is Psalm 127 verse 1, unless the Lord builds the house, the workers labour in vain. Isn't that wonderful? Just to have at the central lobby, those verses.
Yeah. If you ever lost a case that you were lobbying for in Parliament, did you ever get the feeling, oh, what's the point of this?
As a member of Parliament, or just outside as an ex-MP? Are you saying? As a member of Parliament. So look, as a member of Parliament, you're seeking to champion lots of causes. I went into Parliament thinking naturally I'd be speaking up for the family and marriage, those things I hold dear and central to a good society, and for freedom of speech and expression, not least for Christians, but others. I thought I'd be doing that anyway. And look, I mean, on the issue of marriage, you could say that the challenges over same-sex marriage, well, I lost in the sense of that, but also we sought to, there's sometimes that you win one part of it, but then you realise actually the bigger battle is what I eventually realised was about the freedom to be able to, in good conscience, speak up in favour of a belief of traditional marriage, and that's something which is still very much an issue and a challenge, and we need to ensure that it continues. And so you see sometimes I talked about snakes and ladders, I think, in the earlier interview, but it's you need to keep relentlessly looking at those causes and concerns. Sometimes there's issues that I didn't think I'd be really interested in at all. There was one issue, and I think it's worth, and I recognise that, for example, I was involved in a complicated bill around human embryos, hybrid embryo research, mixing human and animal embryos in research, and whether that was acceptable. And that was really challenging. It was complex. And I was trying to look at, as we should do as Christians, not just what we're against, so wanting to ensure that there was proper respect for life and human life, but also what are we in favour of? And so without me realising it, I ended up becoming a big champion for umbilical cord blood and the stem cells that come from umbilical cord blood. And realising I've had 6 children that the cord blood, the cord was sort of thrown away, that actually has some life-saving value for those it can be donated on and researched into, and just realizing that things that you didn't realize before, you ended up becoming a lobbyist, a challenger, a champion for. So, and then that something's become very long-term, really working for a long time. So that was a slow burn one, which I've had a piece of legislation to try and say, why doesn't that get collected much more across hospitals, and why don't we make more use of this life-saving value that can just be thrown away, rather than spending so much time and effort on unethical hybrid embryo research. Trying to look at what I was in favour of and for. Had a piece of legislation that didn't get anywhere at the time, but down the line, eventually, the government made funding commitments and a strategy that does support that better. So some things take a long time. And William Wilberforce, as we mentioned past, is a great champion. He knew most about how long it took to abolish transatlantic slave trade, and how you need to use lots of different opportunities, indeed tricks sometimes, to try and get legislation through. So we need to keep faithful. And I think my focus has always been wanting to try and make sure, should there be the next who's the next Wilberforce, who's going to be championing this issue, that we just need to really be praying for a faithful members of Parliament, people who will be faithful to Christ, and that's their mission, to serve him in Parliament.
Thank you. I've got quite a long text here, which I'll try and summarise as best I can. Somebody who's concerned about the growing wave of gender, sexual identity, ideology, which is creeping into politics, society in general, and especially into schools. Are you worried about freedom of speech and the freedom to actually express what Christians believe on these things?
Yeah, so I think what I hinted at before was in the early conversations was, it's important when we're standing up for these values, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, that we're not just doing it for ourselves. It's not just a Christian freedom. And I was very conscious that as a Member of Parliament, I'm not a Member of Parliament for Christians. A Member of Parliament for Enfield Southgate, I was, and which covers a wide variety of beliefs and indeed faiths and none. And so, but I'm convinced and never hid the fact that I believe that the principles that I stood for were not just good for me, but good for society. And so, whilst not wanting to impose them, I needed to advocate for them in a way that was for the common good and sought to be winsome in that. And that's something which is the case for these freedoms. And it's interesting that dealing with the issue of identity politics and the issue of gender and sexuality, which I think myself and others showed that what out of the same-sex marriage, but in many ways there was issues of identity. I think grew from that, and recognizing the values of men and women and the complementary roles that we play. I think that's really now sped up into this issues that have really affected a lot of people. And it's interesting though that the sides are complicated, because there's many that would traditionally be on the LGBT rights lobby, who themselves are very challenged. Indeed, there's many who are fighting hard for the rights of women, who are very challenged by where they see, for example, transgenderism going, and how it's not necessarily respecting properly the value and role of women. So I think people are seeing that just simply going down a rights-only culture for myself can sometimes be seriously inhibiting and affecting others. So we must be imbued with what is best for others. And so I think I'm hopeful that actually the way things are working through, people are seeing that those who are on the extreme on this debate are those who are just fighting for their own right, and Christians who should be seeking what's good for society are actually wanting to do what's right for others. And we need to constantly be on that side. And what's been happening in schools has been actually some examples of extreme materials that are contrary really probably to legislation that was passed back in my day, when we wanted to seek to introduce good relationships-based education that we care about passionately, don't we, as Christians, loving God and loving our neighbour. And that those relational tools, sadly, many children are growing up not understanding the role of respecting and loving each other, and because they see a household full of conflict and maybe abuse, and sadly a lack of healthy relationships. And that's what is really mattering most. And we can sometimes get, I think, sometimes sidetracked by some of these arguments about gender and rights and miss out the fact that there's a whole stack of people out there, not least our children, who aren't understanding anything about healthy relationships and need to be supported in that, because that's a generational challenge. And my hope is that we then look outward. And so if we look really outward, we see that the big challenges here and the global challenges are not least the rights to freedom of religion or belief, with many, particularly Christians, being persecuted. And when we lose sight of those foundational rights of freedom of religion or belief, so it then knocks onto lots of other rights for women and rights for gender. Those in other countries are seriously being abused because of these fundamental, and I believe Christian rights are being abused as well. So let's be on the side of those rights which are properly for all as Christians.
David, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for answering those questions. We've run over time, but I don't think anybody minds.
Sorry about that.
I'm going to hand over back to David Donegani.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Janice. And thank you, David, for joining with us and for being interviewed by Roger and for all that you've shared. It's been fascinating and just been really good to have you with us. So thank you. And thank you, Michael. And thank you, Rebecca, too, and for Roger for interviewing. And thank you for joining with us tonight as well. And as we've said, if you do want to get in touch, go to reallives.net, go to the contact link on there, and you can get in touch with us there. And don't forget to, we'll pass on the link to someone else so they can watch this fascinating interview again. Join with us next week. Take a look at all the other Real Lives interviews. There's nearly 40 up there now. Really good to have you with us, and may the Lord bless each one of you. Thank you very much, and good night to you all.
When the tide of life is pushing you upstream, everybody around you seems to break up your dreams. All you ever do just seems to make you want to scream. Won't you let the sun shine in? And if the springtime of your life is still rain, and your music isn't loud enough to wipe out the pain, everything you do just seems to leave another stain. Won't you let the sun shine in? Yeah, let Jesus bring the sunshine in. Yeah, let Jesus bring the sunshine in. Let him break you, make you wash out your sin. Let Jesus bring the sunshine in. And if you're walking down the road all alone, going nowhere like a rolling stone, all you want to do is to find another home. Won't you let the sunshine in? Yeah, let Jesus bring the sunshine in. Yeah, let Jesus bring the sunshine in. Let him break you, make you wash out your sin. Let Jesus bring the sunshine in. Don't lie, don't hide, don't try to run away. Don't lose, just choose living in a brand new day. Everybody let Jesus bring the sunshine in. Yeah, let Jesus bring the sunshine in. Let him break you, make you wash out your sin. Let Jesus bring the sunshine in. So won't you turn around and walk the other way? Start up living in a brand new day. Listen to Jesus, take what he has to say. Won't you let the sunshine in? Yeah, let Jesus bring the sunshine in. Yeah, let Jesus bring the sunshine in. Let him break you, make you wash out your sin. Let Jesus bring the sunshine